Good morning. I'm Pastor Stacey McClain with the First Baptist Church in University Place. Thanks for being with me this morning. I very much appreciate it. Hey, today let's talk about money. Money is a hard issue. It's a difficult issue. It's a personal issue. An issue which people don't want to talk about an awful lot. And honestly, when I talk about to people about money or money issues, money struggles, most people will say that if they have any money issues or money struggles, it is that they don't have enough. I have never, as a pastor, had anybody come into my office, sit down on my couch and talk to me and say, you know what? Our problem is that we have too much money. Never had that issue. Never had anybody do that. Waiting for that, but still haven't had that yet. What I find is that Scripture has a surprising lack of interest in your acquiring of a small fortune. As a matter of fact, Scripture tends to put more of its focus upon money being more of a hindrance than a help in our spiritual walk. And so understanding that, we must understand as we're talking about the idea of riches or wealth, it is difficult because most people are starting with the wrong understanding or the wrong appreciation of money. We also have the difficulty, James, we're going to look at James chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. If you want to turn there, that's fine. But as I just make a few comments before we turn to the passage, James will start talking about the rich. And one of the problems which we'll have here is that how do you define rich? What is a rich person? What is a rich family? What is a rich couple? I mean, what is a rich nation? How do you define rich? Because rich is a relative term. A person with a coat, for example, is rich compared to a person which does not have his own shoes. So relative worth makes things difficult, makes the word rich difficult. Listen, in a world where there are the peasants and then there are the ultra rich, it's very, very easy. You have people with nothing and then you have people with everything. You know who the rich and you know who the poor are. But when you have more and more of a middle class, it becomes murkier. It's harder to say, well, that's an upper middle class, lower middle class, middle class. You know what I'm saying? So it's difficult to say who's rich and who is not. So the distinction between the rich and poor is more difficult, once again, in the modern world. So we have the difficulty with the wrong understanding of money. Then you have the difficulty defining rich. We have the difficulty of what I call economies of scale. So different people in different parts of the world, you will see certain amounts of money are worth a fortune in one place and they're not worth much in other places. So when we used to work in West Africa, somebody who could work in somebody's household as a somebody who was a cook, for example, they could make $30 a week, maybe it was $30 a month. I don't remember, but either one is a pathetically small amount of money for us in America, but it's a huge amount over there. So different economies of scale. I picked up some missionaries once, and they had been working in a country which was not clearly as wealthy as the United States. And I remember bringing them home, picking them up from the airport, and I said, hey, do you want lunch? And they said, sure, we'll take lunch. And we went to a Subway restaurant, $5 foot long. So something cheap, right? Something very affordable. And so we bought 3 Subways and a Coke each. They overcharge you for the Coke because the sandwich is cheap. So you're looking at about $7 a piece, throw in some tax, and you're spending $25. And they were about ready to puke up a lung because $25 for them was, once again, what they would spend almost for a week for groceries. So once again, economies of scale make things difficult when you're trying to define things like rich and poor. So again, if I were to ask you personally, so are you rich? Almost every one of you, with very few exceptions, would say, no, I'm not rich. Who really is rich? And then you would point to Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or Bruce Wayne, Scrooge McDuck, whatever, I don't care. And you would point to somebody else and say, that's a real wealthy person. But see, by doing that, when we say that somebody else is rich and I'm not rich, we therefore discount the passage, which we're going to look at today. And by doing so, we get to say, well, I get to take this Sunday off and I don't have to listen to what James has to say to the rich. And therefore, I get to fly underneath the radar. I don't think so. Because I want us to think of it this way. Compared to somebody compared to somebody, and perhaps you're listening today and you're making minimum wage, compared to somebody, you are rich. Compared to somebody, you are well off compared to them. I'm saying, what? I'm making minimum wage. Yeah, you're minimum wage, but what about the person who doesn't even make minimum wage, who's unemployed? And so I'm just saying here today, compared to somebody, you're wealthy. And so therefore, this whole section here has some relevance to all of us. So we're going to be turning to James chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. And he has talked about money. He has talked about rich and poor before. Today, he's going to look at it one more time. I think he's going to use a slightly different method, and I'll point that out as we get along. But his point once in all of this is basically threefold. Those who are rich, and again, rich is difficult to define, but I want us to appreciate the fact that everybody is rich in a sense, because there's always somebody who is poorer than you. So he wants to point out that the rich are accountable. He wants to talk about the security of the rich. I mean, the security of the rich is their assets. And he's going to say, don't be so secure in those. And then he wants to look at the rich and say, it's very possible that you're liable for the misusage of your riches. So he's going to take a look at that. I said it last week, and let me say it again. We have been blessed to bless. And this includes money. This includes your pocketbook. And I realize that if there's something that really touches people, something which really gets on people's, makes them uncomfortable, it's about their pastor speaking about money. But we're talking about it today because we're in James chapter 5. So let's turn there. James chapter 5, verses 1 through 6. We'll look at that section this morning. So James writes here, let's just read the first verse. He says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you." And so it starts off, boom, with a bang. Come now. Okay, literally he's saying, let's take a look, listen up, let's pay attention to what's going on here. And he says, "Come now, you rich." Now again, who are the rich here? And we can also ask the question, is he speaking to rich Christians or rich non-Christians? And I would tend to think that because this is a letter written to Christians, he is writing to rich Christians. However, as we get to the very end of the section, he talks about the rich murdering people. And so I think what he is doing here is he's using a technique where he is talking to the rich in general, and perhaps even to pagan rich, but with the Christian in mind, that the Christian might listen in, and so that the Christian might not make the same mistake that the pagan rich are making. That is the misusage of their assets and their wealth. I had that. I used to work, fast food and restaurants and stuff like that, and I was very good at what I used to do. And I would have my boss, and my boss didn't want to correct me because he didn't want to bring me down and cause grief with me, because he needed me. He needed my help. So oftentimes he would berate somebody, not right in front of me, but within my hearing, because he knew that if he talked to this other guy loud enough, I would hear what he was saying to this other guy, and it was an indirect way that he was talking to me. Okay, whatever. But James, I think, though, is using the same type of technique. I think he is talking to the wealthy pagan, if you will, the wealthy non-believers, and the Christian is supposed to listen in here. And again, the way that I'm framing this, if we understand that all of us are rich, at least compared to somebody, it does work. Okay. Now, what does he say to the rich? It's not a very, very nice section here. He says, "Weep and howl for your miseries that are coming upon you." Howling, miseries. This isn't great. So we might say, well, what are we supposed to do then? If we have anything whatsoever, any assets whatsoever, if we have a shirt up on our back, are we supposed to take it off and throw it away? What are we supposed to do here? Is any wealth, any assets in itself, is that wrong? Well, I don't think that's quite his point. Remember, we have plenty of biblical examples of people who have assets and who are considered godly. You have Abraham, and you have all of the patriarchs who are quite well off. I mean, they have herds, they have they've got lots of critters. You look at Job, and Job, before, of course, the testing comes upon him, has quite a bit of assets. And then at the end of the book of Job, Job once again has quite a few assets. David is very wealthy. Solomon is very wealthy. And, perhaps in the back of your mind, you're saying, yeah, but Abraham had his issues, and Job had his issues, and David and Solomon certainly had their issues. Granted, Granted, okay, I get that, but oftentimes the wealth there was considered a sign of a blessing. Now, with Solomon, to be fair, we know that Solomon, because of his great riches, that did distract him and move him away from the Lord. We get that, and his wives, we get that. So I don't think it's the state of richness. I don't think that's the issue, but I think it's our attitude about the riches. And I think Paul picks it up very nicely. If you go to 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through 10, let me just read it for you. He says, "But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation." See, here's the deal: the desire to be rich. And I think that's a big, big key here. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money, not as oftentimes misquoted, money is the root of all evil, but for the love of money is the root of all evil. So look at that: desire and the love of money is the root of all evil. Or all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. And so what we see then is that those of us who have a disproportionate desire to go after money and to seek wealth as an end in and of itself, there's the problem. There's the problem. It's not the status of richness, but it is the problem of desiring it so much that you're forgetting that you have been blessed. Okay. The goal should not be cash. Okay. Money is to be used for God's glory. Now, some people who are perhaps a little bit more cynical, they would say, "Oh yeah, okay, money's not the goal. I see what pastor's at. This is an indirect fundraiser thing. So what pastor wants me to do is to open up my wallet and to give more money to the church. Give it to the pastor, give it to the church." That's not what I'm asking for here. And frankly, I think that people, Christians, yes, well, not, I think we are commanded to support the church, support ministry. I think that's something what we are to do. Yet at the same time, it shouldn't be the only thing that you support on a charitable basis. Support things besides the church. Find people, find causes for the glory of God, and support those things. Support missionaries, support evangelists, support different good works. That's how this church should be known. Okay, and I think that's an important thing that the church does. You know, I tell new couples when they have their budgets and they bring them before me, I encourage them, put in a line just for benevolence, money that you plan on giving away. There's money that you don't plan to keep. You're not going to give it to the church. You're going to give it to somebody else. You're giving money away. Okay. This helps us so we don't become in love with money. Okay. We are to be a generous people. Well, James continues. Okay. And let's go to verse 2 and 3. And, oftentimes we like money and the stuff that money buys because we get some security from it. And what James is going to argue here is that the money is not as secure as we think. The riches is not secure as we think. Matter of fact, it's an insecure foundation. Verses 2 and 3. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidenced against you, and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. So your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. And essentially, what he's saying, the things which you value, they're not going to last. They deteriorate. They fall apart. One of the things which he looks at, which is strange for us, once again in our modern world, is he looks at garments, and we're like, oh, okay, yeah, clothes. But understand that in the first world, you oftentimes wore your wealth. Okay, you let people know of your connections. You let people know of the money that you had based upon the things that you wore. It shows that you had availability to things. Okay, Let me, before I get to that a little bit more, let's go to Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 through 21. And I've said many times that James is like a commentary on the Sermon on the Mount. So once again, Matthew chapter 6, right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. Do not lay up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. I mean, this is so close. But lay up for yourself treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So look at that. I mean, that's just boom, it's right on. So again, if you have treasures within your home, it can be wiped out by a house fire. It can be wiped out by a thief. Let's go back to the garment idea. So with garments, again, in the first century, oftentimes you would wear your wealth. You would show it just by the clothing that you had. You'd be very, very proud of what you had, because you might wear something nice which came from Egypt, or it might come from the Babylonian area, something like that. It's something exotic. And we take that for granted, because if we want some sort of clothes today, we get on Amazon and boom, we get it. And so it's not very difficult to find things. Matter of fact, we get upset when we can't find the things which we're looking for. I was flying, I was flying to India, got deported from India. It's a long story. But there I was in the Dubai airport, and because I've been deported, I walked around for about 28 hours in the airport. And as I'm walking around, there's all kinds of shops. I mean, talk about a wealthy place. I mean, they had places where they were selling bars of gold. Okay, but so and I was not a customer. Let's be clear about that. So, but I'm walking around, and they had this one shop, and they had a rugby jersey. And I've played 2 rugby games my entire life, so I kind of pretend like I know what I'm talking about in rugby. Oh, take it back. I watched one game and then I played one. Okay, that's what it was. And my background, I've got some Welsh background, and I saw this Welsh rugby jersey, and I looked at that and I said, man, that's awesome. I really like it. But it was like $70, $80, and I said, I can't justify that. I can't buy that. And I said in my mind, I said this. I said, Stacey, just go home and buy it on Amazon. And so I got home and I looked at it. I couldn't find it. And I was outraged that I couldn't find something on Amazon, because it should be available. In the first century, nothing is available. And if you can get some sort of exotic garment or something like that, and then you could wear around, that's pretty cool. Where did you get that shirt? Where did you get that cloak? It's a pretty cool thing. But if your confidence is in that, it's a poor confidence, because how is that? I mean, because the moths come in to eat. And then he looks at the idea of gold and silver, and it says it tarnishes, it discolors. Like, well, it's not a big deal. You can melt it down and that type of stuff. I get that. But your treasures, what happens? The point is that there's a deterioration. Okay. It doesn't look as good. If it's something decorative, it doesn't look as good unless you clean it up. Look at that last section here. He says, your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be an evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. It's kind of, it's the weird imagery. It's kind of like the tarnish jumps off the gold and the silver and attacks your skin like a flesh-eating disease. That's kind of the image here. His conclusion here at the end of verse 3, you have laid up treasure in the last days. What does that mean? You've laid up treasure in the last days. What, you've got your gold and your silver and your garments, and you laid it up for last days, and it's all good? No. I think it's a bit of an ironic thing. He's saying you have laid up treasure in the last days. Your treasure is going to speak against you. It's going to argue against you. It's going to show that you've had the wrong priorities, and where you have this mound of stuff which is going to burn up, where you could have used it to bless others. Well, that's pretty tough. I mean, this is a tough section for people, especially as we are in a relatively wealthy world, and it's still not enough, because people always want just a little bit more, because in our minds nobody is rich. Well, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, etc., they're rich, but we are not. And again, I challenge you again. Consider that you are wealthier than somebody. And if you're wealthier than somebody, you're rich compared to somebody, how can you use your riches to bless another? And again, this is not a backhand way to get extra donations for the church. That is not my point. Find ways to bless other people. Well, let's look at verses 4 through 6. And this here, there's a series of accusations, if you will, against the rich. I'll call this the case against the rich. Verse 4, he says, "Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields." Let me say that again. "Behold, the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you, or he cannot resist you." So we look at this, and the first accusation here of the rich is that, hey, you're rich, and yet you are withholding payment to the laborers who are working in your fields. So there's people that you've hired. You said, hey, come work for me. And you're getting people, peasant class people, and you've asked them to come and work. They've done their work, and it's time for them to get paid. And you're saying, oh, you know what? Yeah, I forgot my checkbook. So I'm afraid you're going to have to come back, and I'll take care of you later. And you come back the next day, and oh yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot about that. My pen is out of ink. You know, a bunch of nonsense. And so what happens here is you have people who are in a desperate need, okay, for their daily wage. You know, give us this day our daily bread. Part of that, you know, in the Lord's Prayer, you want your daily bread because your daily bread is necessary. Okay, it's the daily bread is not a luxury item. Is something which you must have. All the way back in the law, Deuteronomy chapter 24, verses 14 and 15. I think James is referencing this. He says, "You shall not oppress a hired worker who is poor and needy, whether he is one of your brothers or one of the sojourners who are in your land within your towns." He says, I don't care if it's a fellow Jew or if it is a foreigner. I don't care who it is. You hire somebody, you pay him. "You shall give him his wages on the same day before the sun sets, for he is poor and counts on it, lest he cry against you to the Lord and you be guilty of sin." And once again, so as he come back to James, he says, listen, I don't know who you think you are, that God can bless you with so many blessings, and you can't even be current on your bills. You can't pay your bills when they are due. Get it done, because you are rich compared to that other person, and they need it more than you. It's a matter of ethics. So listen, perhaps you're the owner of a Christian business. You make sure that your employees are paid, and make sure your employees are paid on time, because they need it. I mean, I've worked for employers, I worked for an employer who called himself a Christian, and I worked hard for him, and I did a good job for him. And I remember getting my paycheck from him only to have it bounce. Boom. And when that happened, I had written my rent check based upon the check he had given to me, and my check, boom, bounced as well. It's the only check I've ever bounced in my entire life. But it was based upon the fact that my boss had paid me, and I thought it was I thought it was good. I was dependent upon it. Okay, I was dependent upon it. Christians, as a matter of ethics, one of the things that you need to work on is you make sure that you are paying all of your bills when they need to be done, because somebody may be dependent upon it. You might say, well, you know, I'm going to be late upon this particular bill because it's it's a big corporation over there. Listen, if you are willing to defraud a corporation who has the means and resources to sue you to get that money back, all that tells me is that you also have the potential to rip off somebody who does not have those resources to sue you and get recourse. So take care of business. Take care of business. And if you're saying, well, I can't always pay off my bills, then you need to refigure some of your finances. You do. He continues on. He says, listen, he says, you've ripped off the people who've worked for you, and you have lived in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened your heart in the day of slaughter, the day of judgment. When it comes, he says, all you've done is lived in luxury. Now, once again, I don't think he's calling all these people to live in caves. Okay. Even within the New Testament, I understand that these are people who oftentimes are refugees and they've had to run away, and they've lost an awful lot of what they've had. But it's not like they were, let's the end all beat all is to live in a cave. That is not the situation here. Okay. He is not calling them to be hermits. That's not what he's saying here. But he is saying, he says, you rich people, he says, you have lived in luxury and self-indulgence, and you fattened yourself up. And I believe what this is a call to reject what used to be called conspicuous consumption. That is showing off your wealth. Okay. And I think this is a message which needs to be told. And once again, it needs to be told to the churches, because we have churches all around us who will advocate, hey, show off your wealth. Let people know that you are blessed because of all the wealth that you have. We have people who strut like peacocks into their churches. Let people see me. Let people see my bling. Is that appropriate? Does that correspond with James 5? I don't think so. I think the church needs to be known more for its generosity than for its gaudiness. And I believe that's the spirit of James here. Lastly, he comes, and this is the one that really turns your head a little bit. It says, you have condemned and murdered the righteous person. What is he talking about? Condemned and murdered. So once again, as I come to verse 6, it makes me wonder, could he really be talking to Christians here? You got wealthy Christians who are murdering people, and that seems to be that can't be. And so I don't think it is, and that's why I think he is speaking to the pagan rich, but again, with the Christians, with their ear to the just outside, listening in, so that they do not fall into the same trap. I think that's what's going on here. Could it be wealthy Christians? I suppose, but I don't think so. You have condemned and murdered the righteous person. He does not resist you, or can't resist you. So again, there's this murder. Are they shooting people in the field? What's going on here? Well, I think what is going on here is, because they are not providing the daily wage, these are people who can't survive. Perhaps they're starving to death. They can't provide for their family. You say, well, maybe that's an exaggeration. No, not necessarily. They might not be able to feed themselves. Look at James chapter 2 and verse 6. We see also abuses of the rich. Now here I think we've got Christian rich, but he says, but you have dishonored the poor man. Are not the rich the ones who oppress you and the ones who drag you into court? Are they not the ones who blaspheme the honorable name by which you were called? I mean, hey, look. These are people who can cause you all kinds of problems. They cannot pay you. They can sue you. They can cause you all kinds of problems. And so, again, as we look at this passage, it is somewhat foreign to us, because we look at it and we say, well, wow, that's bad news. But if I ask a typical person on the street, so tell me about money, they say, well, I want more. Again, I've never had anybody come into my office and say, I've got the problem with too much money in my hands. I don't see that. We tend to think that we don't have enough. And James, it seems to be saying here, he says, listen, I think those who are rich in the world, the pagan rich in the world, they're going to be held accountable. That they're basing their hopes upon that which is insecure, the riches of this world, and there's a case against them. Christian, listen up, because by application, you can take this as well. Don't be rich in this world stuff. Be rich in generosity. Be rich in good works. That's what you need to be involved with. I think this is a cry for us to be and again, let me be clear in this, especially considering the political climate that we're in too. This is a call for a personal responsibility. So for you to personally be generous, for you to be personally out there and being a blessing to other people. This is not about, hey, what we really need is that we need to reform the government so that the government can spend money for somebody else. I don't think that's what he's talking about here. He's not talking about some sort of government revolution where you make the government go ahead and spend things for other people. No, you take care of it. The responsibility is on you, not upon asking somebody else to do. Don't take the responsibility which is onto you and push it off to another entity, a corporation or a church or a government. But it's your responsibility. We have been blessed to bless. Pastor, I truly am poor. I don't have 2 pennies to rub together. Great. If that's the case, do you have time? And do you have talent? Do you have any other way that you can bless another person? Because I can guarantee you that you have more of something than somebody else. And if that's the case, find a way to use it for the glory of God and to help other people. Well, I just have nothing to bring. Can you read a book? Can you go to somebody in a nursing home? Well, it's difficult today. Can you find somebody that you can read to, that you can bless, that you can pray for? I said, I can't get out anywhere. Can you pray for somebody? Take your time to pray. All of this in this section here, it has the idea of a generosity in treasure, a generosity in talent, a generosity of time. Whatever you have, all of them together, but use them for the glory of God. You are wealthy, you are blessed, so bless. I hope that's valuable for you this morning. It is a passage which I need to go over for myself personally to remind myself of the perspective and the priorities which we are to have as we walk on this earth. May God bless you. Thank you again. I appreciate you being with me. And I hope you're able to use this as part of your worship service. And anyway, to the glory of God. God bless you now.